I am Rocio Millan from the Social Commitment Department of Siemens Gamesa, and I am very happy to be with you today in this webinar, the third in the series of our Hack STEM event, an initiative to foster STEM careers through innovation and talent. But I am especially happy that this webinar is hosted by Aalborg, a university with which we've been partnering last year in the project-based learning mega projects. It was a fantastic experience, and we were extremely happy and honored to be with them. I think we will all agree that humanity is facing great challenges, such as fighting the climate change, but also great opportunities, like achieving the Agenda 2030. But for that, we will need a lot of talent. And not only that, we will also need to have a continuous training to encompass the rapid technological changes, transformation of the world we live in. And I believe this debate will give you more clues on how we can do that. And without further delay, I will give the floor to my colleague, Friederike Tumega. Thank you, Friederike.
Thank you so much
for being here.
Thank you, Ruthie. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Good evening, depending where you are. My name is Friederike Tumega. I'm heading our regional communication in Siemens Gamesa, and like so many of my colleagues and engineers in the company, I'm incredibly passionate about the STEM topic. We have four excellent panelists with us today, so I will try to make this as brief as possible and leave as much time for them. Catherine Richardson, Chair at Sustainable Development Solution Network in Northern Europe. Catherine is a professor in biological oceanography and leader of Sustainability Science Center at Copenhagen University. Also a council member of the Danish Climate Council and the former chairwoman of the Danish Climate Commission. Furthermore, she was appointed by the UN Secretary General to be a member of the expert group responsible for developing the UN 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report. Thank you and welcome. Very happy to have you, Catherine. Second, Olaf Geil, the Vice Dean at Education at University of Aalborg. Olaf is Vice Dean at the Faculty for Engineering, Science, I believe, at Aalborg University, and a professor with responsibilities within the research group Reliable and Secure Communication, and holds a PhD in mathematics. So welcome, Olaf. Very happy to have you here. Then we have Emilie Norman, Head of Research and Analysis at the Danish Technology Pact. She is also, actually, I believe, is also the Danish Foundation for Entrepreneurship, where she also plays a key role as head of research. Both entities promote STEM competence in education and in the workforce. And Emilie is also a member of the new advisory board for mission-driven innovation set up by the National Danish Innovation Fund. Then we have Camilla Hansen, who is a consultant at the Department of Regional Development, North Denmark region. She works at the strategic and political level, where she's one of the driving forces behind the North Denmark region STEM initiative, the North Region Tech Pact. So with no further ado, I would like to, hand the floor over to all four of you to tell a little bit more about why each of you wanted to have agreed to join our panel today, our webinar, and what it is about STEM that you are so passionate about. Catherine, maybe you want to go first.
Thanks very much, Friederike. Yes, I am passionate about STEM, but it's one of the reasons is that it interests me so much how it has changed in society. I'm so old that when I was going to school in the 50s and 60s, there was no question. If you were good at school and you wanted to make money, you did STEM. I mean, I don't think I ever made a conscious decision that I would, where I was choosing anything from. This was just the obvious path. That's what the smart kids did. But that's not the way it is anymore. Something's happened in the interim, and I'm quite fascinated by what it is and if it has to do with the wealth of our society or what it is. But STEM is so important to us because it's the only way we can understand the world around us, through technology, we can get more leisure time because we can replace workers. It gives us infrastructure to be able to enjoy our life. So it simply gives us a better life, but it's gotten a really bad name. And we need, I think, to focus very much on our STEM education to try and bring it back into good graces, as it were. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Ola, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. So maybe I would start with talk about why I'm passionate personally about this. I still remember when I was a child and I was really asking myself this more or less existential problem. Is the universe finite or is it infinite? And if it is finite, what is then behind the border? And that's a crazy question. And I mean, you can get crazy by thinking about it, right? And there's a direct line from that to me playing with programming on a computer, to me trying to reveal the hidden patterns in mathematical areas, to me supporting young people in my role as a vice dean, playing with engineering, doing their studies. So that is where my passion comes from. And then for me, it's also kind of yin and yang. I don't know which is yin and which is yang, but for me, STEM is one of them. And I would say philosophy and what do you say, religion and these kind of things are the other. And the one thing you discuss big questions. In the other thing, you also discuss big questions, but you also construct them and play with them. And that is what I really like with STEM, that you can do that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ola. Emilia, you want to continue Ola's stream of thought?
Well, yes, thank you for that. Well, I think I've been working in the field of ICT, both in the public sector and privately, for 20 years. And I think it's really critical. I think the notion has become so much stronger than if we are to create growth and innovation in Europe, there's no way around STEM. It's a key enabler for not only, solving huge societal challenges. ICT and technology is a critical part of that. And young people with STEM competences and skills are critical for our green transition, for creating a sustainable society. So I think that's really, I think that relationship is becoming so clear to us over the last, I think there's a big shift over the last 5-6 years. And also now working in the Danish Technology Pact, which was established back in 2018. The Technology Pact has a clear mandate as part of the Danish government's sort of activities around digital growth to mobilize what is out there, both within education, within businesses, within SMEs, within public organizations, smaller and larger projects. So we now have over 120 projects in the Technology Pact doing really exciting things around STEM. And today we're going to discuss a lot about school and what goes on in the education system. And that's clear. There's a huge challenge there, which was also mentioned both by Catherine and Olaf, that we address and that we create that enthusiasm for STEM. Because we do really need young people to decide to take a STEM degree. And the 3 goals of the Technology Pact is to just generally interest Danish people in STEM. Secondly, to increase the number of people who study STEM and who take a STEM degree. And thirdly, to upskill the workforce. And my personal passions in this space is both diversity. I think it's so critical that we mobilize more young women to be interested in STEM, and there has been a decline in that, and that's a key role and responsibility for all of us. That we create inspiring STEM education, because inspiring STEM education is really, I think, the key to get more young people to study STEM. That we create a clear link between STEM skills, and the green transition, and also that we focus, when we look at the education system, on vocational training, because there's a lot to do in that space of educational training and pushing for STEM competences, both for students but also for the teachers. So that's some of my passions and my interest here.
Lots of things to cover, Emilia. Lots of great topics for us to discuss today. Camilla, what are your thoughts?
At a very personal level, my reason I'm passionate about STEM, I think, is I recall, like Ola, this childhood inquiry and trying to understand, how do you build stuff? How do you make things fit together? I grew up in a home where my father did a lot of construction, so understanding like, how do you build foundations for a windmill? How do you build a home was, I think, one of the places where it started for me, and also just trying to understand the causes of things. Like, all right, how do you fit this together so it works? That's something that's always fascinated me. On a professional level, with the work we do at the region and in the North Denmark Tech Pact, I'm echoing Emily a lot, that to succeed going forward, to have the capabilities we need in our labor force to solve all the issues we see coming towards us, we need STEM capabilities, and we're seeing that there is this there's a lack of interest, or not a lack of interest, but what Catherine was saying, that there STEM seems to have gotten a bad rep somehow at some point, and we're fighting against that, because those skills that you acquire when you have that interest in STEM is going to make your life way easier to live in the kind of society we are walking into.
Thanks, Camilla. So for those of you out there who would like to ask questions to any of the things going on in the panel, or to any of our panelists, please make sure to add your comments or questions in the chat box, and we will take time at the end of the discussion here to address any questions you guys might have. So we plan to take approximately the next 40-45 minutes for the discussion of the various questions and topics, and then lean into the questions that you might have. So please don't hold yourselves back. Go ahead and start asking your questions already now if you like to. Building on a lot of the things that you guys already said, I mean, we're talking about how today students enter this technology-based society, and we have a situation where economies need to reinvent themselves. We need to be able to be problem solvers. We need to be able to find solutions for climate change and find sustainable solutions for our planet, and that STEM has a key role to play in this transition. So how do we motivate our students to get involved in this? How do we get better at combining STEM, as Ola said before, with other disciplines, whether we talk about social sciences, or we talk about, when Ola mentioned philosophy or other sciences. There was a prognosis published yesterday by IDA, the Danish engineers, and Danske Gymnasium, showing that by 2030, the expectation is that Denmark will be lacking as many of, I think, was it 78,000 skilled laborers and about 13,000 engineers and candidates in technical sciences and IT. So what can we do to meet that challenge? Our discussion today will center around, providing more of a panoramic view of the STEM education and the challenges, and then talking a little bit about how we can strengthen the STEM value chain, and how we can enable lifelong learning in the learning experience to be able to build the skills necessary to address the challenges we have. So yeah, we hope that we were able to touch upon some of the things around how STEM can be a part of solving the world's challenges as that we stand in front of, very much as Camilla and Emilia also said. So maybe we start out with talking a little bit about the value chain. How can we ensure this continuity in STEM education from, and learning from early childhood and into adulthood? What is needed for us to do that? I don't know, Catherine, Camilla, and if you want to lead on that question.
Sure, I'll kick in. I started out by saying when I was a child, and I think that is for many of the people who are professors or really in science and technology now, this was the case. It was an elite game, and I think we have, I think in a way some of us, maybe generally, we have delusions of grandeur. In one of the papers that was sent out to us about this meeting, it said, today's students enter a technology-based society. No, they don't. It's a people-based society. And that's maybe part of the problem, that we seem to think that somehow we're special and it's a special box that we need to get into. So I think we need to stop thinking of STEM as being an add-on. And, you know, for some reason in Denmark, we decided to begin teaching chemistry to girls just when they're going into puberty, and, you know, their chemistry somewhere else. We should have started in kindergarten or even before. So I think STEM needs to be an integrated part of learning from preschool and all the way up. And maybe it doesn't need to be focused in on as being a special box or something elite or something only the very best do. I do a course together with the business school and the technical university here in Copenhagen, from the University of Copenhagen. And I tell you, the students we have from the University of Copenhagen and from the business school are afraid. They're afraid of their colleagues from the technical university because they think somehow they're better or smarter or whatever than they are. And I just don't think they are. We need to change this narrative.
I very much agree with what you're saying, Catherine. And I think especially this idea that, oh, you have to be very smart to work with STEM, and it's very difficult and it's very challenging. I think that's one of the problems we're facing. That's what we see when we see studies from younger cohorts. They're choosing not to do STEM, partially because they think they're not equipped to handle it, or they're not intelligent enough. And it's not good to frame it as an elite thing, because it pulls a lot of people away that could easily just participate in it. And I also agree with you that childlike curiosity and inquiry could very easily embrace STEM. So when you're curious about things, you want to know, how does this work? Why does it work? And you could shove in a lot of STEM knowledge if you incorporate it better when we're working with younger children.
So what would that look like? I mean, when we talk about incorporating that when working with younger children in practice, what would that continuity look like? What might that look like? Especially when we have first and foremost, like when you're still in the formal education system, but also beyond that, what are some of the ways we could do that?
From the chair where I'm sitting as a representative for the North Denmark region. What we look at is how to collaborate with others who work with our regulatory purview is upper secondary education. So that's where we have a role, that's where we have funding, that's where we can work directly. But if we just narrow-mindedly focused on that part of the formal education, then we would develop interventions or projects with no connection to what the youngsters or the children might experience until they hit upper secondary. So the way that we work on ensuring continuity is that we try to be very focused on collaborating across, vertically across the education system. And that's why instead of just releasing a call and having our upper secondary institutions apply for funding, we've created the Tech Pack, we've created a coordinating network where we have representatives from the municipalities who work with primary education, and also before you go to formal education, we have representatives from tertiary education, and just by talking to each other, we can widen our impact, we can align our ideas of how to work with improving this across the education system.
Going back to what you and Catherine said before about, kids think that they have to be specially gifted or incredibly smart to be suited for STEM. What else do we know about what makes children or young people lose their interest in STEM education? Olav and Emilia, do you have reflections on that or
Well,
insights on that?
we know some things, but I think it's so difficult to change it. So maybe we don't have a full picture somehow. But the way I see it is that so far we've been talking about the way we teach young children. I think that is the problem. We should not only teach young people, they should also play with it. So science should get out of this, be part of not only the school, but they should play with it. And STEM consists of these 4 letters, and engineering is one of them. But so far there is very little engineering in public school, and I think introducing that and play and have another more playful attitude towards it could make a change. So it's well known that that children, and in particular girls, lose the interest, start losing interest from age 10 or 11. I personally think there also is something happening in high schools where, of course, you look at yourself as a young person and ask yourself, what do I want to do with my life? And nobody knows what an engineer do. So what an engineer does. So I mean, it doesn't become part of the possible solutions to what can I become.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of good points there, and what Olav said, that there is, because it's true, we do know something, and one of the things we know is that we need to play much more around the sort of within the creative space. I mean, we have in the Technology Pact been holding a number of series of symposia where we gather experts and teachers and researchers and foundations to look at how to push them and how to make it more attractive. And then what we do know is that we need to start very early. We need to start in the preschool stage. So we need to have both that element of STEM integrated into kindergartens. We need to also teach pedagogues and others who work with young children around how can they work with STEM, particularly in a creative way, in a playful way. And then we also know throughout the school system, education system that we discuss, that it is true that particular young girls around the age of sort of udskoling, so yeah, in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, they start to lose interest. They don't see any role models. They feel that STEM is decoupled from reality, which means that we know that we need to include much more sort of the real life, and we need to create collaboration with sort of societal challenges into the education. And to do that, we need to have a broader sense and a sort of a cross-disciplinary approach to STEM. We've also been told several times that we need a new national STEM didactics, and that needs to be developed. And I think that's going to be very useful for the wider educational system. So there's a lot of sort of points where we know that we are losing young people. And we also know that the role of parents is extremely important, both in terms of when they decide which courses to take in school, and later on when they decide on what to study and what to work with afterwards. So we need more campaigns, and we're starting to do that in Technology Pact around parents and the role of parents to motivate and tell this compelling story of STEM. And parents don't necessarily have the understanding of STEM. We know that about 50% of parents don't know really what STEM stands for. So we want to also engage those, because they are very important in understanding the sort of the choices that young people can make. So there's a lot of concrete efforts. We also know that STEM is decoupled from other courses. Engineering, yes, is a problem, particularly around math. There's a lot of research going on around math now as well, because they're experiencing a little bit the same things. That it's seen as very academic. It has some issues of integrating creativity in its sort of curricula and how it's being taught, and its self-awareness. So there is, I think, efforts we can do that. And finally, we also know that we need more research. That's one of the things pointed out. We need to continue to work on this topic to see what are the relevant efforts and areas, and where do young people, what can we set in to kind of motivate young people?
When both of you talk about a more playful approach to STEM or creative approach, what does that mean? I mean, for those listening, when we talk about having a playful, Catherine is raising her hand. Please jump in, Catherine. I'd love to hear. I mean, what should I be visualizing when you say a playful or a creative approach to STEM, to learning STEM? Catherine.
If I could just quickly come in there, because
Don't have to be quick.
One of the hats that I have on that you didn't actually introduce me with is that I'm a grandmother.
Yes.
And when my children, who are sort of in their early 30s, when they were going in school, we were told, oh, do not teach your child letters or numbers. There are professionals that will do that when they arrive at a certain age. Now, I have 2 grandsons. The oldest one is 3 years old. And when he's completely enamored of this program called Mr. Beard. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh my God, that kid not only counts to over 102 languages, he does math. He knows how to subtract. He knows what happens if you take 2 cows or 2 apples away. He's 3 years old. He also spells words because Mr. Beard does letters too. So he walked to the refrigerator the other day and he wrote the word giraffe, totally correctly spelled because he could hear the sounds. So, you know, I have no doubt that for kids now, when they get into school, they won't be frightened away by numbers. They know them and they feel them and they sing them and they play them. So I think this is so important. And my attitude to Mr. Beard has completely changed. He's my favorite guy.
So Haskeg I love it. He's a groundbreaking event in this in education. Pretty cool observation. Sorry, Emilia.
No, it was just because you asked, okay, what is creativity within STEM? And some of the things, and also some of the big foundations in Denmark, but I had also been sort of identifying what is good and inspiring STEM education, because that's really, I think, what we're looking at when we're discussing also the creative aspects of STEM. And some of the key words, of course, that it's problem-based, it's cross-disciplinary, it's experimental, it's applicable, it's relevant to society, it's based on inquiries as well. So all of these things, if we look into what determine inspiring and good STEM education, it needs to have all of these elements. And I think once we know that these are the elements that make up good STEM education and elements of creativity, we can start exploring, okay, how then we then facilitate those things? How do we open up the learning space so that it can be more experimental, so that it can relate to sort of real life challenges, so it can build on challenges in companies and SMEs out there. And we can also make learning outcomes targeted around that. And we can really start, and I think that's a critical point as well, to create these cross-disciplinary partnerships within education between teachers and between the courses they run.
But I think we lose a lot of children. They actually have a great interest in the technical area, but they lose their interest during school because we tell them that this is only for the most clever guys or girls, or maybe even guys in the class. And it's very difficult, but maybe they have a talent for the more technical things. And I think we lose a lot of children there. And I really believe that the engineering method, when that is being introduced in the school now, I think that will have an impact.
I agree with Ola there, if I can jump in.
Please go ahead, Camilla.
I think the explorative part is very important when we talk about creativity and STEM. And if we talk about maths, there's a huge difference between being taught. You have to learn you have to learn to subtract, you have to learn to divide, you have to learn to, or putting it into a context where you need to do that to solve a problem you're faced with, or where there's an explorative phase where you're given a problem and then you have to figure out how to solve it with these tools. And ideally something of real world application, especially for some of the kids Ola mentioned who have a technical interest. it's important that it doesn't end up being theoretical without this real world application.
Following that stream of thought, when at the opening of this session, we were talking about SDGs, challenges the world is facing, sustainability. Is the climate crisis and if you can say the awareness and the activism we've seen among children and young people, especially on this topic, do we have an opportunity here to use that as a lever to get kids engaged in choosing STEM and to sort of like connect the ability to play a role in solving these challenges and finding the solutions that the world needs? Do we have an opportunity here that we should be aware of seizing? Camilla?
Yeah, well,
Emilia.
there definitely is, and I think it also allows us to address these problems that we have in STEM, particularly around young women, because what we know is that they're very sort of purpose driven. They would like to see, and not just girls, but there's very clear got that they like to see they're focusing on how can I make a difference? How is this relevant to me? And we know that we interest more girls if STEM education is seen as something that addresses real life challenges. So I think there's an obvious connection here where we also have the opportunity to include many more girls into the STEM courses by creating that combination. And we also, that whole of sort of company education collaboration is also what we see in the school system when it's based on sort of SDGs and solving climate changes and climate challenges. STEM is seen as much more relevant as well. So I think it's really is on the education system to look at how to involve in a sort of in a curricular way the climate challenges we face and integrate it and make it relevant education, because we also then allow for different narratives around the STEM, and we will interest students who wouldn't otherwise pick a STEM course. And I think, of course, when they then graduate, we will have some talents and some skills and some competences that are hugely relevant for us. And that's also coming back to a little bit about the vocational training. We know that we need many young people to take a vocational degree, otherwise we won't solve the climate change. And we have a lot of potential to really create more engaging STEM within the vocational training space. So that was just a comment there, that we will actually manage to solve some of these challenges that we are discussing in STEM if we have a much clearer focus on how STEM relates to climate change.
Excellent, thank you, Emilia. Catherine, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I have 2 points I'd like to make there. One is, I think there's a really dangerous narrative, both in Denmark, but I've also met at other places in the world, that technology is going to solve the climate problem. Or
are we talking about the hockey stick right now?
No, we're not talking about the hockey stick. We're talking about technology will solve this. And we also the fact we're calling it just a climate crisis. It's just as much, and maybe even more importantly, a biodiversity crisis. And that is critical here as well. But when I say it's dangerous to talk about, okay, technology will solve it, then there's a whole lot of people say, oh, well, I'm not technology, so, let them do it. And second of all, technology cannot do it alone. Technology has helped us in our development before when we were limited by a working force, but we're 7.8 billion people at the moment. A workforce isn't really a problem. And when we were missing infrastructure, but most places on Earth have plenty of infrastructure. Our problem now is we've got too much waste in the environment, and we're running out of resources. And technology can't make energy. That's, the laws of thermodynamics. It can't make biodiversity. It can't make the phosphorus that we need to grow our food. So technology isn't going to solve this. It's the way we use technology. So we need to bring the idea of STEM in together with other kinds of studies with people. 15 years ago in the EU, the politicians said, hey, we're driving too much and we're polluting too much with our cars. The climate we'll get technology to make cleaner cars, more sustainable cars. And so they set new standards and technology did it. And what happened? We set the price of cars down in Denmark and our behavior changed. And now we're driving more in private cars than ever before. And we're impacting climate more than we did before we got a so-called sustainable technology. So technology isn't going to do this alone. So we have to bring that box and integrate it into other activities. The other point I wanted to make,
can we stick with that just for a second? When you say this, elaborate a little bit more on technology can't do it alone. You know, a little bit more. So what does, it's a little bit like the point of STEM can't do it alone, that Ola made before, right? When you have the yin and the yang, there has to be also a different aspect, a completely, we need to combine, you can say, the best of several worlds to actually to get there. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, we can't, can you name one technology that has actually ended up with people using less resource, the humanity, not people, but humanity using less of the Earth's resources? For the most part, technological advancement has just made it easier for more people to use the Earth's resources. So right now, the way we're living in our highly technological society in Denmark, if everybody lived like we did, we need 4.2 Earths, and we're not going to get them. So we have to combine the technology or the science and the knowledge that we have to combine it with our behavior. And we need our governance system, which isn't just politicians, it's also what we expect from one another. We need our governance systems and our economic systems we can use to get the balance right between our behavior and the technology that we have. But technology on its own isn't going to solve this, and we have to stop arguing and also just giving money to technology to solve the problem. And you know, if you want to talk hockey stick, in Denmark, we have a goal of a 70% reduction of CO2 emission by 2030. The government has changed the laws in such a way that we expect to come a third of the way. And the rest of it is left to some technology that we just hope is going to be developed between now and 2030. And it isn't going to happen.
That was your first point, and sorry for interrupting. You had a second point.
My second point was that when I said the biodiversity crisis was just as critical as the climate crisis, and I think it was Emilia was just talking about women and girls and what interests them. And some years ago, I was the advisor to a minister in the new reform for secondary education in Denmark, and they said some you had to have, in order to be able to study the health sciences, the natural sciences, or the technical sciences at university, you had to have mathematics at high level, physics and chemistry. And there weren't any girls. And so, and you know, the snobby engineers were saying, well, you know, biology isn't a real science, we can't do that. But the girls actually like biology. So I did actually manage to get a few arms twisted behind their backs and say, well, you know, maybe we could have biotechnology instead of chemistry for some of it. And the girls suddenly just came streaming in. So we're back to this elitism, I think. And you know, biology is just as, I mean, what makes this planet special, unique, is the fact there's life. And why isn't biology also just as important as physics?
You muted yourself now, Catherine. Thank you.
I know I did, because I thought I should shut up now.
Don't worry about it. Ola, I saw that you were also you were leaning in a couple of times.
Yeah, so this is a strong narrative that technology will solve all the SDG problems. And Catherine challenged it in one particular way. I actually want to challenge it in another way. because is it really true? I mean, some of the problems we see today were have their origin in STEM. I mean, the CO2, where did that come from? That comes from machines. Well, STEM invented the machines, and so on and so forth. STEM is also a very strong driving force in the development of our military. It's also what not so nice countries use for surveillance, and so on and so forth. So I think what STEM can do is to create things, and STEM can has definitely helped improve our wealth. And now we are in a situation that we need STEM to solve the crisis we are in, and indeed it can do that. And in the industry and everywhere, there are really enthusiastic people who want to save the world. So this is not, the narrative is in that sense true. But can we convince young people that this is the only narrative? I don't think so, because they are more clever. So they also know that STEM is part of the big mess that we are in now.
But you said, one of you guys mentioned this thing that as much as, I think it was you, Emilia, that as much as 50% of parents do not know what STEM is, right? What is entailed there. There was a US survey back a couple of years ago by Randstad among students aged 11 to 17 that where 3 out of 4 did not know what engineers do for a living, right? I think one of you guys have also, a couple of you have mentioned this branding image. Is there an image challenge for STEM among young people in terms of how STEM is perceived?
I think Catherine is also, I'll just say very quickly, yes, there is. And what we know and what we hear is there a challenge for STEM to show how it's relevant in so many different kind of occupations. So it's both the narrative, but also the applicability of STEM to so many exciting things. And I think that's been very clear. And that is, again, coming back a little bit to diversity. That's what we know for sure, that we need more diverse role models, and we need to see the more diverse relevance of STEM, because that just attracts many more young people into having an interest for STEM. And we know a few of the Danish universities who've been very successful in turning their kind of recruitment campaign around, both using more women, but not traditional women, but women doing interesting things. And that has just increased the interest in studying a STEM degree. So I think that's one way to go forward, to have a diverse view of what you can do with a STEM degree. What can you do when you take a STEM course in elementary school? And that will also help parents, because they do struggle. And we know that from campaigns that parents are, of course, the key sort of source to go to when you decide which courses to take. In particular, mothers are the key source. And we know that about a little over 50% of mothers don't have a clear understanding of what STEM can do. So I think by changing the narratives, by being much more diverse in how we explain what STEM is relevant for, we can both attract young people, but we can also attract those people that they relate to, their parents.
Any other reflections, Catherine? I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's such an arrogant and elite question. I mean, how many of those students who were asked that question, do you know what an engineer does? If you said, do you know what an anthropologist does? How many of them would know? I mean, does it matter? The point is, yes, as Olaf has been in, STEM has a bad branding. It has a branding that says it's only nerdy boys that do it, and it ruins the world. And Olaf has been in there. So we need the good example. It has a branding problem, but not because people don't know what engineers do. It's because they don't want to do what engineers do. And so we have to show them the good examples of what is done, and that there are actually things like women involved in STEM activities?
I would like to come back to the gender point before, but I would actually challenge what you're saying there, Catherine, because I do think that people not knowing what an engineer does is in fact a barrier to children and young people starting to study engineering or going into the STEM subject, simply because many kids visualize what they would like to do when they grow old. They visualize, I want to ride this horse, cut this hair, do this makeup, dance like this, be a policeman and save people, be a fireman and save people, be a teacher and take care of children. Whatever it is, they visualize from the education to the role that they will have, you know, having this education. So I think I would challenge the notion that not understanding or knowing what an engineer does or what you can do as an engineer is not a barrier to being interested in going into engineering.
But all of the things that they visualize are things they've come in contact with. I promise you, they don't know what a biological oceanographer or an Earth system scientist, which is what I am, what they do.
But are there a lot of people applying? Are there a lot of people applying to study that? Then, I mean, if you don't tell people what it is that you're doing, right?
But I don't go out and say it's engineering or it's biological oceanography. It's why are these plants in the ocean as exciting as they are, and what can they do? And that's what I think we need to do. We need to, I mean, I know lots of little kids who want to make things when they grow up. They may not know that's what an engineer, it's called an engineer, but they want to make things. And that's what we need to celebrate.
Camilla?
I think Catherine's last point has a lot of value, that does the labeling matter so much. I also think that it's true that as a child or a very young adult, what you know about what does this type of job function entail, that's good. You will only know the people that you're very close to a certain degree, what their job functions entail, but also like the central societal functions. Like, we know what a doctor does because we're in contact with a doctor. We know what a teacher does, but we're in contact with teachers. And right now we have a focus on STEM, so we're saying, well, do people know what an engineer really does? But there are a lot of other job functions that people just do not know in detail unless they have family, and I think that has that job function. And sometimes we come across this thing that STEM educated individuals are self-replicating class, and I think that's also because that their children then know what does this job function entail in a whole different way. I'd like to loop back to the earlier talk about role models, and when we talk about this branding issue with STEM, I think there's there's both that people or young people might think it's dusty or nerdy or not very interesting because they don't relate it to real world issues. But there's also the other one where they say it's too difficult. And when we talk about role models, to address that second part, I think it's super important that we look at role models that are relatable and that might have meandered into the STEM field or aren't the stars of the field yet, or maybe they will not become one, but finding role models that children or young adults can see themselves in and say, all right, well, this isn't this crazy savant genius. This is a regular person like me doing this thing that I thought was super difficult. So yeah, just jumping in on a few points.
No, I really appreciate it, Camilla. Olav.
So I think both Catherine and Frederikke are right. So of course, children young children, they should not know what an engineer is. They should just play around with it. But if you go to high school, I think it's critical that they know it. And in the Danish system, in the Danish system of training, university, you distinguish between science and engineering. So you can work with chemistry as a scientist, or you can work with chemistry as an engineer. And I mean, 80% of the topics you follow are the same. Those teachers that we train for the high school, they are trained as scientists, and they don't have knowledge of the working market for an engineer. And I think that is a problem. An engineer is not just one profession, it's many professions. So I think it's really, really a problem that the young people don't know what engineers do. I really think that's a problem.
Emilie.
Yeah, and if we take the just to build on what Olaf says, if we take the last letter in STEM, the mathematics, what we know, I mean, clearly, I think what we have heard when we have run our symposium is that we need an integrated STEM approach, so that the 4 different areas are much more integrated. But if we look at math, there has been a decline in young people in studying and working with math. So that's what we see, and it's been going down. And we also know from research, for instance, we partner up with LabSTEM at the University of Southern Denmark, and who've done research into that. And they do say that they find it really difficult to see what math can be used for in the school system. So we did, in one of our symposia, we looked sort of very concretely, then what can we do? And I think also there's something to work on that. What can we do to push for math and make sort of recommendations for how can you make math much more part of the integrated STEM approach? And very much around math and education, which is looking at math both, and I think that also goes as a skill, both as a skill set and as a tool as well. So which is a slightly wider view of what math can be, how it can be taught, which also means challenging a little bit of how teachers are taught how to teach math. The open school process with integrated sort of teaching between school and private sector, and make that open. We definitely need more resources and competences if we're working with an integrated STEM approach. So there was also some suggestions for having learning materials much more readily available on online platforms, creating networks among math teachers, but also with other STEM teachers as well. So a lot of very sort of concrete things that can assist teachers in working with maths in a much more sort of inquisitive and creative way at an early stage. And then this bridge building we've been talking about. So I do think that some of the way forwards is these very, very concrete suggestions for how to make STEM integrated. And for instance, starting with, it could be engineering, but there's a lot of suggestions around math. Which
when you talk about equipping teachers with this, is there also a mindset change that is needed? Is there, do we need to think differently also among educators?
Yes. And
okay.
I think there's and I think there's 2 schools. There's 2 schools. Catherine, I think will supplement there. I think it seems to be 2 schools. The one that is where math teaching and teaching math is very open to this integrated approach, but also I think a very relevant concern about that we are watering out what is a math competence. And I think we have to be aware of that and listen to that, those concerns of math teachers as well. I think goes for all the STEM, that we want to move forward with the integrated and open and experimental approach, but we also want to hold on to what are the key skills within a certain topic. And I think maybe that's what Catherine wants to elaborate on as well.
What I was actually going to say is that was referred to earlier, this report that came out yesterday in terms of the fact that we're going to be missing engineers and so on. But the other thing this report said was that we might be getting into a situation where we could actually have people who are trained in the fields they're teaching in by the time we get to 2030. And that's a major problem at the moment, that we have people, especially at the lower grades, teaching subjects that they're not trained in. And so, and the pedagogy, or whatever it's called, the way you teach math is not the same way you teach English or Danish or whatever. So we have, at least in Denmark, we have a problem with the teachers that we have. But I do think it's a problem. I'm absolutely, certainly we need to have high competences within our own field, but it is a problem that we only train people in their own little box. And we have a feeling that if you become an expert in this disciplinary box, If we took all the details from this box and mixed them together with all the ones they can do in the other box and the other one down there and the other one, then we'd understand how the world works and we would solve the world's problems. But you won't, because it's interactions between the boxes that are important. And that's what the SDGs actually tell us. So yes, we certainly have to have high math competences, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also train in using them in other contexts than just solving mathematical formula.
Ola, you look like you want to say something also.
No, maybe I would like to say a lot of things. I don't think that. So I agree with the problem in the school. So it's not only that they don't know the topic. It's also because the problem is also that they are not enthusiastic about mathematics when they teach it. I think that's maybe even a worse problem because it's not their first topic. Maybe I leave it there.
Yeah. Can I go back to something else that you guys have talked about a couple of times? You've talked about, Catherine and Emily, you've both talked about, how to get girls engaged, right? You've talked about, changing, what was it you said, from, over to biochemistry, and suddenly there was you could get girls, changing our approach, changing our way of framing things, changing the way we teach. I mean, is there a way for us to differentiate our approaches when it comes to ensuring a better gender balance in STEM? And if yes, it sounds like most of you have already answered that question, but what do we do? How do we approach, trying to get a better gender balance into the STEM sciences?
Well, I'm happy to go first, and I think maybe it's less about if I can challenge you, Frederik, because I think it's such an interesting question, whether it's about differentiating the approach. I think it's less about differentiating the approach, but more about tapping into what will make girls more interested in STEM. And that's not necessarily different things than attracts the boys. We just don't do enough of it. And we have touched a bit on it, and that's also some of our clear recommendation. We need diversity in role models. Just that whole topic of role model, and we need role models who don't look necessarily very feminine. They can also, we need different role models of women as well in this. So there is different role models for women to relate to as well. So that's definitely one thing. The narrative needs to change. Again, coming back to the what we call in Denmark, the anvendelsen of what can you do with STEM skills? How can you go out and change the world for something better? All of those examples need to be much clearer, because that will just attract more women. So, and then we also know that the whole institutional frameworks, I mean, even though we know that still a lot of books and materials and course books doesn't have that wider narrative. So we need schools, and we need those who produce education material to go back and revisit what it is that they produce, what are the photographs, how do they sort of explain the value of STEM in a way that girls find it much more interesting. And we've also heard, I think, from some other panelists, that it's taking away the fact that it's something difficult. Doesn't have to be. I also wanted, because there's also a question in the panel, in the chats that we have come to, is that can we do something in the informal learning system, like after school activities? And we can definitely do that. I mean, in Technology Pack, we have some great projects like High Five Girls, Co-Coders, a lot of projects who work in after school activities with initiatives aimed at young women. And coding is also for girls, different tag names they have, which really, I think, is going in there and trying to create something that the girls like to do, very much around community-based things. And that's also what they tell us. If you want to have more young women coming into this, there needs to be projects and activities that are seen as something you can do with your friends. So we actually already know, we know a lot about what we need to do. I think we need to implement it.
I absolutely agree with Emily. She basically, you touched on the things that we look for as well. Role models that are relatable, the way, the course materials, and this community-based approach. I just wanted to add on to one of the things that we're trying to do to make role models more relatable, or showcasing the way into STEM is we're working with a project where we have we want to have a student who's studying STEM in conversation with somebody who's already gotten a job in the STEM field, to show to people in, or youngsters in upper secondary education, all right, here's somebody who's on the way there, and here's somebody who's already there. And I absolutely agree with the diversity of the role models being important.
Catherine, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I agree with all these things, obviously, but I think we have to be very aware of the fact that a lot of this, in terms of gender distribution, is culturally based. And, you know, in Denmark, we consider ourselves very open, and we have and over 90% of the men interviewed say they don't think we have a problem with gender distribution. And yet, within the STEM, something on the order of 12 to 14% of the professors we have in this country are women. Whereas if you go to Southern Europe, it's a much, much different story, or even to the countries around us in Scandinavia, it's a much, much different story. So it's not just a question of how we teach and what we do, it's cultural. And as long as the vast majority of men don't think we have an issue, I don't think we're going to change the culture.
I just want to second that. I think that's very true. We have this, what we call sort of, the unaddressed bias, or it's not even unaddressed, we all know that, but we don't really address it in a very, I think, conscious way, because we think that it was difficult to change societal structures. But that is, of course, that is also a real big barrier. And that's being taught not just in the school system, but that's also part of what young women meet, both in their home and in kindergarten and everywhere. So there's something to do there as well. And I think we actually address it best by being very open about it. So it doesn't become the other thing.
I saw you raised your hand too, Ola.
I have one comment, but I have to mention that I have a private communication going on with Catherine. She mentioned in the private communication to me a few minutes ago that I'm the only man in the panel. And I must say, I didn't realize that until Catherine told me. So, so much about that. Well, in 2 weeks' time,
You're muted, Catherine.
I was going to say he should be honest and say that I told him that as the only man in the panel, his only option was to say that both Frederica and I were right. So
that's great. Now, in 2 weeks' time, we will be part of this community Girls Stay in Science at my university. So we have an event for 250 girls coming to a very special event for one day. And we are extremely excited about that. And that's something we started 4 years ago. It goes on all over Denmark. I think there are 200 events. And that's fine. But now I realized the other day that might be not the right solution, because some young women or girls are now saying, I don't want to be identified with my gender. So what is the implication for that approach and for the other things that we are talking about here? And that's a question. That was not an answer. Because I'm puzzled now.
Camilla, do you want to answer Ola's question, or do you want to?
It's related to that. And that's one thing that I've been thinking is, when we talk about role models, when we talk about addressing the way the information is brought across, one shortcoming we keep hitting, especially in the most gender segregated professions, is what we ideally would want is teachers of both genders, so that you don't just, all right, twice a year you will have some sort of contact with a woman in the field. What we want is that some of your teachers are just going to be female, no matter what course you choose to study. And especially, I think that some of the technical fields you will be taught by men. And it's a hen and egg issue that we need more women in the field, so that some of them might end up being teachers, or more women in fields related to the field, so that we can have more female teachers. But I've spoken to quite a few of our schools up here, and they say, or institutions, and they say we can't get them. They are not available. There are none that we can bring in. So that's, as Olav said, it's not something that I have a solution for, but I think that is a problem due to our quite gender segregated labor force.
Emilia, you were next, but I saw Olav show.
Yeah, because I'm a
he was
mathematic.
puzzled about the teacher.
Yeah,
point,
because I am a mathematician, and I teach mathematics at university level, and half our pupils or students are female, and they go to high school. So I don't understand that part. I think there are a lot of female teachers in high school in mathematics. I believe that, maybe even more than men.
But what I was specifically thinking about is some of the technical education, vocational training, where you have vocational training systems where some of them struggle a lot with actually having female teachers. Yeah, but I agree, in high school it's a different story. In upper secondary.
Emilia, you raised your hand too.
No, it's just that the issue of, is there a difference, and does the gender in the view of the children play a big role? We one of the projects in the technology pack is called co-coders, and they run these coding sessions for young women, but they also allow boys in there. And some of the things they're going to look at is that they actually have a lot of boys attending also coding classes called Girls Do Coding also. And some of the things that we're going to look at is whether that actually attracts boys into a space where it says girls do coding. Is that seen as something fun? And are they even aware of that gender aspects of it? That's something we are aware around it, but I think it's going to be interesting to get more knowledge of how do young people themselves view that, and how do they view the gender difference, and does it play a role into what they choose to do? These are sort of extracurricular things that goes outside when they finish school at 2 or 3. I think that's going to be interesting, because I think they may themselves have different views, and we also realizing we need more information on that.
If we stay a little bit with the question that was also asked here in the chat box about informal learning systems, after school activities, integrating STEM into these activities. Some of you have touched a little bit about it already, but what about lifelong learning? What about when we have when our children and young people have been through the formal education system? How do we organize that lifelong learning, that learning journey throughout life? Enabling people to continue to learn, or to, I was thinking about it also when I read the before mentioned survey, or the before mentioned analysis that came out yesterday, that the analysis also talked about the need to upskill or provide people with different skills throughout life to make sure they adapt to the labor market. So what are your thoughts around this?
I have sound issues. Might just be me. I lost some of what you were saying.
Me too. There's some
Yeah, I
problem.
did too.
So maybe you should just answer the question, and then.
I think actually she might have frozen. No, she's back.
No, she's.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could. The question has to do with formal education, and I could kick it off and say, I think we have an enormous problem in society at the moment, because we only have formal education. It used to be sort of half of your life, and now it's like a tenth of your life, or maybe not, but a bit more, 15, maybe 20% of your life. And the rest of it is there's no formal education. I think that's one of our major problems with climate change at the moment, because the fact that you see young people coming out and really taking to the streets, they've had it as part of their education. They understand it, they know what it is. Whereas those that are older in society have no way of getting this information in, and media are proud of the fact that they have no education responsibility here. And so all of our decision makers are in a position that they don't really understand what they're talking about when they're talking about climate change and the challenges there. They understand economy because those models have been around since 1600 and white cabbage. But so they learned about them in school, but climate change, they don't understand, and the risks that we have there. And I don't know how we solve that here, but certainly we have an enormous problem that the vast majority, you spend most of your life outside of and after formal education.
Ola.
Yes, so being a vice dean for education at a university, I actually fear that the universities will be out of business in 20 or 30 years time if we don't reinvent ourselves. And that relates to the question of lifelong learning. Because do you need a degree, or do you need some experience or another way of documenting that you have some skills? That's the big question. I mean, Google have now, I believe, started their own academy, so we can follow their courses there, and then they hire you. And so if we should be better at providing resources for lifelong learning, we really need to find a model for doing that. I think that the solution for that would be to engage more individually with the working force, with each person, and they could solve problems from their own business in collaboration with, in my case, university. And of course, we should have some digital course that we support this with, but I think we should get really very much play very what do you say? It should be a very customized solution for each person.
Emilie.
Yes, if I can supplement that, I think that's very true. I think we need to see life learning as something that's part of a continuous learning journey that people are on, and very much agree also with the point that Catherine made, that we have a problem with, for instance, older people in SMEs. This notion that, and particularly being skilled for climate change. And that's maybe sometimes the problem, again, coming back to STEM, that you get specific skills. And we know that there's so much uncertainty around climate change. So we don't necessarily know what kind of skills people need. And we definitely know that they need to mix up the skills they need. So they just need to have that integrated approach to competencies and to skills, which also means we don't necessarily know what will be a relevant course for, let's say, an engineer to be part of the green transition. We just know that they need to be open to the fact that more knowledge is needed and they need to apply their skills in a different way. And I think to teach that as part of lifelong learning, that's going to be, I think, really, really valuable. We have done a few symposiums on upskilling of SMEs, and we definitely find there's a lot of barriers around digital knowledge and digital skills in SMEs. And we see, I think, if I just take a few of the barriers, is at the management level, both they don't prioritize it and they don't see a need for it, and they find it actually difficult to understand and how they can use it in their business. So we need to push them to because if they don't upskill themselves, they need to attract the relevant talent. And then, also as we said by Olo, a lot of upskilling is seen as not relevant or not relevant to their particular need and task. There's a lot of training courses out there. There's a lot of great operators who offer lifelong learning and continuous upskilling. It's seen a little bit as a jungle. And it's also seen as continuously difficult to find, okay, what is relevant for me? We have a lot of great agents we have in our sort of business support system who try to help with getting the right relevant skill, but it somehow is not hitting the point. So I think that's where we need to also step in and look at how we can get the right skills and the right application of sort of integrated innovative STEM, particularly to the older users of knowledge.
Camilla?
I agree with Emily, and I'm very intrigued by what Ola was talking about with, is there a way forward where we customize solutions? Because what we're seeing in the North Denmark region is we've known that you need digital competencies in a company or an SME for a very long time, but our companies are struggling. And one of the ways that they've been solving it so far is that they bring in consultants, like they get their digital expertise from outside the company, and that creates a different kind of change, a more they invite somebody in to work within a box, not looking at the corporation or the SME as a whole. So it doesn't. I think we're going to have issues with actually lifting SMEs, also because if there are people in a company that see an opportunity and would like to further their skills education, as Emily said, there are a lot of barriers where you're going to have to spend a lot of energy, in some cases, convincing the company of the importance of you upskilling. So I would like to back up Olav's point about there might be a way forward where it's a very customized solution or offer that you bring to the table.
Thank you, Mila. I think we should move into spending the rest of the time looking at some of the questions that have come in. Emily, you've already addressed the first question, and you all have talked about this thing about the after-school activities and that informal learning. But there's a long question here from one of your peers, Gesine. Lisa, Camilla?
Yeah, if I could just add one
please.
thing to the informal learning thing is, I think we've talked about some informal learning that, for example, happens on after-school activities, but one thing that we're looking into at the region is if there is an opportunity where to combine the issue of the parents' attitudes and knowledge about STEM having a huge influence on the choices their children make with informal learning situations. So are there opportunities is there a way that you can bring parents together with their children and then have them have inquisitive, interesting experiences with STEM, and in that way kickstart conversations between the parent and the child about STEM? So there are of course projects that focus on informing the parent about STEM opportunities, but we're looking more at this playful, informal situation where parents experience STEM with their children. Is that a way of nudging the conversation between parent and child? So not just after school activities, but also room where a parent can explore with a child.
So now we are finalizing this first part. I think that is something that we missed totally. I think there is a huge potential in involving the industries and the companies in solving this, because it's both the teachers who need to see what they're doing in industry. It's also the children who needs to see what they're doing in industry to make it concrete. And there are so many fantastic things going on. Right now, I'm sitting in Lego. I just visited the whole plant here. I mean, I'm excited about that. I think other people should have the same opportunity to get excited, right? And I think that there's a method there we could use.
But Ola, you're actually getting into what might be the last question here from Gesine Lise, who asked us, she writes that she's been on a panel and she's run STEM projects for 3rd to 13th grade for the last 15 years at the Hamburg University of Technology. And one of the things that they found there is that teachers don't really know about the opportunities. She mentioned biochemical engineering, biomechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and the children also don't know, adults don't know, and they don't have any role models for the profession, like you guys also mentioned before. And then she gives a couple of examples, right? But these people who have are trained in these topics, they bake with yeast. The kids use their products, right? They use the yeast. They know what a hip replacement is. They eat the food that's produced by chemical engineers. So they are familiar with the output of these people who are working in these fields, but they do not know what, you know, the role there. And she asked, to very much to your point, Ola, how can we get better internationally at promoting research and career opportunities in these fields, right? How do we connect, as you say, what's going on at Lego or Siemens Gamesa or at Arla or at Grundfos, or at, you know, how do we connect what we have in our hands and the things that we use in our everyday? How do we connect that with these topics? You know, so that you know, you and our initiatives can have the impact that it deserves to have. So let that be the final question for the panel today. How do we get better at making this connection, at bridging the gap between the many cool things we see around us and then understanding, you know, I remember I used to work for Lego back in the day, and we would get letters from children who would say, if I want to do this one day, what should I study, right? If I want to train to become a model builder, what is your advice for me, right? And we would have a department who would send back letters to these kids and say, these are the things we suggest that you train in to get good at this. How do we get kids to get that, make that connection? Catherine.
Yeah, I think it's I think it very much has to do with our education, all the way through the system, and that we need to be moving from describing to transformation. What we really need in society at the moment is a transformation. And until now, at our universities as well, when we write research grants or we write a paper or whatever, we tell about our research and then we say, and this will be relevant for those who are interested in X or trying to do Y. No, we need to take the next step. How will it be relevant? How can what you are doing be part of a transformation? And I think you can take that all the way down into the very, we were talking about it with mathematics, that it isn't just to learn math for math's sake, but the fact it really does help you understand how many cows are in the field is critical. So I think focusing more on transformation and the role that whatever you're doing can play there is critical.
Excellent. Emilie, Ola, Camilla?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, I can supplement. I think also, yeah, I think we have actually, all that we haven't addressed it at all. I think actually we have in part of that, how to create inspiring STEM, which really, I mean, a key part of creating inspiring STEM is to create those partnerships between the education system and the real life challenges represented by particular industries or smaller SMEs and others. So students get the sense of, this is what I can do. I can go out there, I can solve these challenges, I can work with them, I can see, okay, that's also how it can be used. So, and we did a report on how to create these sort of school virksomheder, so school industry partnerships as well. And there are different tools to go about it. And there's definitely sort of, you can create repositories, you can create cases that the teachers can tap into. You can, on the school level or even the municipality level, you can endorse these partnerships. I just think there's one thing to be aware of when we involve industry or SMEs into the teaching role, is that most research shows that they're not the best trainers themselves. And that teachers who know how to teach as part of that pedagogy need to have the teacher role. So we need to be aware of what are the frameworks that we create when we involve industry and sort of startups and SMEs. Startups is a great, I think, incentive to have in education. They need to be cases, they need to be maybe challenges to solve. They shouldn't have the key teaching role. And I also think they very often don't want that, but just the point to make.
I think that's fair enough. I think that's fair enough. I think for me, I would be curious looking at from the view of my company, right, where we have 13,000 engineers around the world that build wind turbines, different parts of them. I would be curious to understand, what can I do? What can we do, you know, on our end to make sure that we play our part in developing the workforce that we need. How, you know, what can we do in collaboration with education or the different initiatives to make sure that we take our part of the load? Catherine.
Just very quickly back on that one, I would totally argue that Emilia is right, that it's important that there's visibility with companies, but most companies, and especially the small ones that are focusing on the here and now, come in and tell the kids what they need today. And we're training children to meet the needs of tomorrow. And there's not all companies, the big ones got it, and they can invest in this future. But a lot of the small ones, and this is one of our problems with vocational training, is that you learn what the master learned and what we need today, and that's not what we need tomorrow. So the responsibility should never go over to businesses or industries.
Camilla, I saw you raised your hand previously.
I think Catherine's point about the responsibility should not move to business, but I also agree with Emily that there is where we can gain a lot from close collaboration with businesses and SMBs is showcasing this issue with what does a chemical engineer do. That might not solve the issue of, all right, so what do we need you to be able to do in 30 years? But showing youngsters and children what are these different job functions, and I think companies have an essential role there in helping the education system in showing like a broad spectrum of different job functions that they might not see in real life, or not the doctor, not the teacher, not those that they are in contact with. And to tie a little bow, one of the things we're looking into with partnerships with SMEs is if we can use SMEs to provide continuity throughout education. So we have some cases where companies work together with a specific grade and then work with that school class throughout a period of years at different levels of complexity. So they revisit what that company does throughout their move through primary education, for example. And even if we in a like the ideal scenario into the secondary education as well. And I think there are opportunities there. So that's one thing that we're looking at. And the other one is your question of what should you do? Like Catherine says, the big companies are already doing a lot, but showcasing what you do when you're have this degree, what is it that you actually provide? What is it you provide for your company? What's the end product of it? I think that could be a big help to have that available. So when our young kids Google what does an engineer do, or what does a biochemical engineer or biomechanical engineer do, they get the right information.
Yeah, fair enough. Ola, I saw you too. You also want to say something.
Yes. So I was not talking about the industry or the companies should be engaged in the teaching. And I don't like in the other direction what we call soft drink visits to companies either, where you just visit at a company, you get a soft drink and that's it. So neither of those works. So what we need is somehow other solutions in the middle here. And you ask, Frederikke, what could you do as a wind turbine engineer? I can tell you specifically what you could do, because 2 hours or maybe 3 hours ago, I was talking to an engineer here at Lego, and he told me about how he has visited 20 times high schools and for 1 hour as part of this organization called Engineer the Future. Their book and expert initiative. As part of that, he visited high schools 20 times, where he talked about how he used mathematics and statistics to improve the production here. And I mean, these kind of things, and also getting to help the science educated people who educates or who teach at the high school, to get them to know what is mathematics, physics, chemistry, what is it actually used for in real world. And we need some good stories. I mean, because those teachers cannot tell the pupils about what is going on in the industry if they don't know it.
That's a really good advice. We should definitely have more, you know, where you can rent an engineer to come tell you what's going on and what they're doing. I think that's it's a really nice initiative. We do have we do invite schools to come visit our plant and have engineers meet with them and show them, this is what we do, and this is my role in creating what you just saw, to try to bridge that gap. So we are on time. Does anyone want to let Olav have the final word, or anyone wants to add something? Catherine, Emilio, Camilla, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think Olaf did a very nice conclusion, also coming back to you, Siemens, because I mean, you've been hosting this wonderful event. So
I agree. I thought that was a really nice ending. Thank you so much, then.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a big applause for you. All of you.
Diego.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A pleasure. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye.
Nice to work with you all. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for a good discussion.
Bye.